I am incredibly honored to have Sharon Wilson-Geno sitting next to me. She is the current president of the National Multifamily Housing Council, and she brings over 3 decades of experience. I have closed a lot of deals with her, but her history encompasses affordable and now I guess what we call attainable housing, and the National Multifamily Housing Council is the largest organization, trade advocacy for the apartment community, for developers, lenders, investors, owners, operators, with over 2,000 members. And they do important work on research, industry issues, trends, advocacy, and why this is important, why this is related to REITs. So many of the REITs are in this sector and part of this organization, but it's also a sector that is really, helping 40 million Americans from every walk of life, also supporting 17.5, almost 18 million jobs, and over $3 trillion in economic activity. So NMHC's white papers, partnerships, data are an invaluable resource for understanding the current market. So very happy to have her here today. So maybe, Sharon, we'll just start for people that aren't familiar with NMHC, and also what I like to do for students is also a little bit of career trajectory. Sure. So maybe we'll start there.
Sure, well, thank you, Marc, and I'm so pleased to be here. As Marc mentioned, Marc and I go back 20 years working in the affordable housing space, so it's always a pleasure to be with him, and also a pleasure to be with so many students. I did spend some time, about 15 years teaching, both at George Washington University's law school as well as Georgetown University in Washington, where I live, and so enjoy it, and unfortunately, other work demands meant that I couldn't continue it, but I do miss it, and I do like to pop into a lot of student events, so this has been fun for me. So how did I get to, let me tell you a little bit about NMHC, and I'll tell you a little bit about how I got here. NMHC is a large trade association of about 45 years old. We are about 2,000 corporate members across the country, and really it brings together every aspect of the real estate umbrella that functions in multifamily. So owners, developers, and managers are probably our core membership, but people that provide debt, equity, other tech companies, and I really enjoyed the last panel. We're doing a lot more work in that intersection between real estate and tech, which is really exciting. But people at every segment of the multifamily market space as well. Everybody from what we call capital A affordable, which is what Marc and I used to do, which is subsidized housing, all the way up to Class A space and everything in between. So that's a lot of the work that we do. We advocate, we provide industry information, we do a lot of data and research, as Marc also mentioned. How I got here, which is a little bit of a circuitous route, and frankly, and I've said this publicly before, when this opportunity to join NMHC came to me, I wasn't so sure I was interested. It wasn't exactly linear in my career trajectory. Most of my time has been spent, started my career as a lawyer, and went to a large general practice firm. I'm going to do this for the students. And it was all I ever wanted to do was be a lawyer. I was sure that's exactly what I wanted to do. I got there and I hated it. I hated it. And I was just miserable. And so I was looking for things that would make me more interested in what I was doing. And the firm had a very robust pro bono program. And I got assigned to work for the local Habitat for Humanity chapter on closing some deals and doing some things that I really wasn't doing as part of my job. And I just fell in love with the housing work, the urban environment. I went back to school and got a graduate degree in urban policy. And then was lucky enough to practice law for 18 years at 2 different law firms, both in the very capital A affordable space, but also doing advocacy and regulatory work primarily for the public housing program, something that's near and dear to my heart. So I did that work for a very long time. And Marc and I had the opportunity to really be embedded with some clients that we both served in truly rebuilding a city. And having the opportunity to be part of that kind of mission was what really excited me. And over time in my legal practice, you get what clients bring you, and I really missed that opportunity to be part of a broader initiative. So I moved over to a large national nonprofit, Volunteers of America National Services, but first as their lawyer and general counsel, and then spent 5 years on the business side running their affordable housing platform, which was about 15,000 units in 40 states, and their senior care platform as well, which is about 4,000 beds over 8 states. And then COVID happened. So running nursing homes during COVID was not exactly what I had in mind, but boy, did I learn a lot. And so I wasn't necessarily, but I loved the mission, loved the work we were doing, wasn't necessarily looking for a new adventure, but what really turned my head here was, it's this moment in time. For so long, housing has not been an issue that on the national stage or even on state or local stages, people have taken housing for granted. And unfortunately, coming out of COVID especially, but even before that, we're facing a national housing crisis. We do not have enough housing to house Americans. And the opportunity to be part of that national conversation, as well as on the state and local level, and we'll talk a little bit more about that, was really too juicy to pass up. So that's how I got here.
Yeah. So maybe this is a mea culpa for both of us.
Okay.
We haven't solved the housing crisis.
I know.
And it feels like it's gotten worse and it's expanded. You know, we thought about it as something kind of that happened in our coastal cities and our sort of like first tier cities, but now you're seeing it in your second, third tier cities. And certainly developers want to develop, builders want to build, lenders want to lend. What do you see as the impediments, and what are the ways that NMHC is trying to sort of tackle some of those impediments to building more supply?
It's a big question because it really hits at the state and local level so granularly, which is where a lot of that work happens, but also at the federal level as well, because there are federal subsidies, particularly on the affordable side, that are really important. And the federal government can also play a role in helping incentivize state and local governments to help break down some of those barriers. So the things that we're looking at, first of all, what do we need to do to build more housing and create capital markets that will step up and invest in multifamily? A lot of that is also federal policy and federal initiatives that have been happening over some period of time. We were in a great interest rate environment for a very long time. So money was available, people were building, things were going fine, although there were increasing challenges at the state and local level in terms of regulatory barriers to building multifamily housing. Everybody's heard the term NIMBY in this room. Politicians have increasingly seen the opportunity to garner votes by siding with folks that are not in favor of building more multifamily housing and instead are in favor of keeping their perceived keeping their own property values up. So it's been a struggle, but when money was available, we were able to kind of work through some of those challenges and get housing built. Again, but we've been losing ground since the 80s or 90s in the overall supply. Our country has continued to grow, and we have not been keeping pace. Coming out of COVID, what we really saw was a whole flip the script. Many people, and the demand for multifamily housing has grown incrementally, and we were simply not prepared to address that. That's where you saw rents go up. That's where you saw a lot of pressure on just getting anything available, and also on the homeownership side as well. So we've seen a lot of pressure on the homeownership side, which also bleeds into multifamily, as you can imagine. What that result has been is looking at solutions that are more supply focused, making money available at the state and local level, dropping barriers to zoning. I love the use of local tax abatement in building housing, particularly at that, not just low income, but in that modest level as well. There are opportunities there. But the bigger issue that we're facing now is the do no harm problem. Because housing has become a crisis, the easiest thing for politicians to do is say, okay, we're going to regulate it. We're going to regulate ourselves out of that. And we're seeing that happening at the federal level and at the state and local level, particularly with rent regulation initiatives. There's one pending right here in the state of New York as we speak. And those are really detrimental to bringing the capital markets to the table in the way we need them to build our way out of this crisis.
Yeah, and we're seeing, I mean, one of the issues with the US is, right, you're the National Multifamily Housing Council, but every local jurisdiction and every county and every state has their own regulation, building codes, financing, mechanisms. And so what are the ways that you sort of nationalize this as an issue? And are you also simultaneously working at the local level for some of that advocacy to change things?
This has become three-dimensional chess. We're taking initiatives that are happening and working well at the state and local level and trying to elevate them across the country to other states and localities to say, here are some solutions that work. And at the same time, as part of our federal advocacy efforts, creating programs at the federal level that incentivize those states and localities to break down barriers to building multifamily housing. Great example, there's a statute that passed in Florida about a year and a half ago called the Live Local Act. This passed on a hugely bipartisan basis, and I just want to say that repeatedly, in Florida, believe it or not. But the Live Local Act is a comprehensive approach, and I think that's really what we'd like to see states and localities do moving forward. Many of them are responding to this little part of the housing ecosystem or trying to sponsor legislation that would do this little thing. It really needs to be a holistic approach. What Florida Live Local does, among other things, but it really reduces the barriers, the zoning barriers and other barriers to creating housing for the localities. It really takes some of that power out of their hands. That has been hugely politically controversial, and there's still some pushback in Florida about trying to ameliorate some of what happened already. So that's step one. Step two is Florida put their money where their mouth is, and they authorized over $800 million worth of new state money to help support particularly low and moderate income housing. So that's another opportunity. And then finally, they closed the door to rent regulation. They had long had a state statute that said, we're not going to have rent regulation, but here are some exceptions. They really cleaned up those exceptions and ensured that everybody across the state of Florida was playing on the same level playing field from a regulatory standpoint, and some localities couldn't pass rent regulation legislation that would really keep more multifamily out.
Yeah, well, and it's interesting because there's Live Local in Florida. Mm-hmm. There's the SB 8, 9, mm-hmm. 10.
California.
In California, which is something that I hadn't seen before, which is being punitive, right? Actually, creating a pathway to get things built, even when the jurisdictions didn't want to. And I'm wondering, with those, now we have some sticks, right? So if certain municipalities aren't meeting their housing goals, we have builder's remedy. Mm-hmm. We haven't seen a lot of cases, mm-hmm. but I'm wondering your thoughts on builder's remedy, and maybe for the audience, we'll talk a little bit about what exactly that is. But your thoughts on builder's remedy and your thoughts on sort of preempting local jurisdictions in order to solve this larger housing problem.
I think you have to do something. Our country, the population of our country is going to continue to grow. People need to live in places, and in a civil society, people should have roofs over their heads, and I feel very strongly about that. But we've created this environment where some people believe that their value or their economic security is in the value of their home, and the only way they can protect that value is by keeping others out, and particularly multifamily housing, when in fact, all the data will show you that the building of more multifamily will in fact increase your property values. It will help communities economically otherwise. So I think that we're going to see more of that. It's on the table in Massachusetts as part of the governor's package there. It's on the table in Colorado. And California has had the opportunity for quite some time, but they've started to file cases. When you start seeing those cases being filed, I think that's when you're going to see folks say, okay, this is serious. And frankly, I think there also, and I'll just throw this in, there has always been a fair housing component to this, that private litigants and interest groups could file cases against states and localities that prevent housing from being built if it would impact or exclude folks in a protected class. And I think some of that already goes on. But those are hard cases to prove, but I think there always has been an opportunity there as well.
Yeah, and we're seeing, so one of the cases in California where the state isn't meeting its mandate, it hasn't passed a housing plan, and theoretically, soon builders can just build. They can supersede the zoning and the permitting process. And so I imagine nobody wants to see that, but I think to your point, we've come actually to that point where we might have to preempt local jurisdictions that are preventing housing.
There's something of a hybrid too, which I think is interesting in Connecticut, that takes some of the power out of the local planning commissions. It basically says, okay, if someone's coming in with an affordable project and it meets these criteria, you can only reject it for like 2 things. So what then happens when the local jurisdiction may not like the project, and if you try to reject it for something else, the builder can go directly to court. So it allows for that negotiation to happen much faster, on a much faster track, and the planning commission to come to the table and say, okay, we really don't like your project, but we know you can go directly to court. So if you do these 2 things, we'll approve the project at the planning commission level. So I think there are some compromises there that I think give localities the opportunity to weigh in on some of these things, but also say, hey, we need to build more housing here and we can't prevent it for reasons that are truly arbitrary.
Yeah. I mean, we do have the regulatory barriers, but as we've talked about already today, we have higher interest rates, we have higher costs, and issues around labor. So, right, there's a profound effect on that's also affecting supply. In some areas, we're seeing a lot of building, actually more. I would say New York is not one for a number of reasons. It was announced that our vacancy rate is 1.4%. But I'm wondering sort of what you're seeing in other parts of the country. I hear, right, like Austin actually, is seeing a decline in rental rates, maybe, some oversupply. What are you seeing around the country? Because it feels like it's very different depending on what geography you're in.
Absolutely. And I was telling Marc as we were coming up, we were just getting our preliminary quarterly market numbers. We do a quarterly survey every year, about 200 owner-developer managers across the country. And it's just like a very short, what's the vacancy like in your community? Do you think it's getting better to access to capital, and a few other questions. And pretty much everybody's saying, about 2/3 of the respondents in all the categories basically said it's about the same. Some said it's a little better, some said it's a little worse. The additional thirds divided about half across all categories. But in terms of occupancy, there is an oversupply in about 10 markets. And those 10 markets are the markets that people really flocked to over the last 5 to 7 years. The Nashvilles, the Phoenixes, Austin, Denver. So there is and part of that too is because in the ordinary course of time, those units would have come online, they would have gotten absorbed reasonably. Because of all the supply chain interruption during COVID, and then again, the quick interest rate increases, some of those projects were delayed. So they're all coming in sort of a glut. We're going to see we saw some of that at the end of 2023. We'll see much more of that here in 24. But people are still moving to the places where we're seeing oversupply right now. So our expectation is that that oversupply will get absorbed here pretty quickly in the next year or 18 months. At the same time, what's happening is because of the high interest rate environment and the other challenges you face, high construction costs, equally challenging among other things, new starts are down probably 50% in the last year. So if it's not going in the ground, it's not closing in 2023, that means there is going to be very little supply coming on the market 2026, 2027, and we are going to be right back where we started once again. But the supply challenges are truly uneven, and there are, particularly in secondary markets, there's real shortages in places that people moved during COVID, Boise, Bozeman, just to name a few.
Yeah. So maybe shifting a little bit, because we're talking about multifamily, and multifamily takes on a number of different casts, and some of your members, including REITs, are in sectors that have sort of expanded and probably come under your portfolio. I'm thinking specifically of things like student housing, build to rent. Have you moved into those spaces also in your advocacy, in your convenings, and the ways you're looking at multifamily broadly?
So we've had a long time interest in student housing. We have a we have a student housing conference that's in October every year that focuses specifically on that space. There aren't a ton of players in that space, but there's other real estate operations that are starting to get into that space pretty quickly. That has been, of all the sectors in multifamily, that has been very high performing, continues to be high performing, continued demand. So we see that as a place that we've advocated for a long time. The build to rent, single family rental are sort of two heads of the same thing, and people confuse them. Single family rental typically is the real estate investment groups buying up existing single family. Build to rent are specific units that are built single family for the sole purpose of renting. Most of the build to rent communities they're uniformly managed like a multifamily project. They're on the same plot of land like a multifamily project. So we're increasingly seeing those as like high rises, horizontalized, if you will. So that's a space that I think we are going to continue to see more and more of. And in part, it's market demand. People that used to be first-time home buyers are delaying that first-time home buying process due to interest rate increases and lifestyle choices and other things. But they want 4 freestanding walls, a patch of grass, and most importantly, they want a place for the dog. That's the demographic. Couple with a dog. So we're seeing much more of that, and I think that area will continue to grow.
Yeah. You know, in that sector, I think there has been some controversy, right, in certain communities about, you know, are you taking housing away? But we're also seeing in the numbers right now, especially with interest rates, that that's actually the affordable choice. And I wonder if that's do you see that as like a policy issue? Is that an advocacy issue? Is that, you know, something that should be sort of decided jurisdiction by jurisdiction? Because some are, right, there's some localities that are trying to thwart, you know, that market.
And that again is where the blurred lines are between SFR and BTR, single family rental, where investors are buying up existing single family for rental purposes, and multifamily investors who are going out and financing specific purpose-built rental. Two different things, but those lines are getting blurred. Why? In addition to the market dynamics of there being a lot of demand for this product, for all the reasons we just discussed, one of the reasons why multifamily developers are leaning into it is because the entitlements are much easier to get. They don't have to go through the same zoning process to get additional density on a smaller lot. It looks, walks, and talks like single-family housing in a largely single-family community, so there's much less controversy. If we balance the politics of this a little bit, where people accept the fact that there should be housing that goes up like this, and there could be housing that goes up like that, and we don't try to pick one over the other, and we need all the housing we can get in many communities, I think you'll see some of that balance off. But for right now, there's a reason why people are looking at BTR opportunities in addition to the market conditions. It's easier to build. They don't have those delays.
Yeah. So one of the kind of depressing things is I think when you and I were working, we focused pretty much on affordable. People talked about workforce. Now the word is attainable housing. And if you look at the Joint Center for Housing Studies, you know, recent multifamily report and some of the reports that you've come out with, you know, people at the $100,000, $120,000, $140,000 family income can't find housing, can't find housing that's affordable for their income. And that's a number of factors, right? That's the cost of land, that's you know, labor, that's just the cost of building a house. And there's also a kind of lack of new starter homes. And it's also where we can build, right? So usually the places where you can build multifamily and dense multifamily is in places that are already dense, not in places that might have the jobs or the transportation, but that are zoned single family. So I'm wondering what some of the things you're doing to advocate for now attainable housing, right? Because we don't have funding, we don't have a lot of funding mechanisms for people at that, let's say 120 to 160K a year, but now we're at a point where they actually need housing that's incentivized.
Right. So we've long had the low-income housing tax credit. We did have a bill introduced this year to create what's now called a workforce housing tax credit. It's not very big. It's going to take quite some time to get it packaged in a bill. I don't see it happening here anytime soon, but at least we've introduced the topic that there needs to be some federal incentive to build housing up to that 150 level. But you're absolutely right that this is the highest demand area in the market, and because of the cost of financing, because of the cost of construction, it is the place that is the toughest nut to crack in order of building new. My shameless plug, the National Multifamily Housing Council is having our upcoming meeting in May in Nashville to focus exclusively on the intersection between workforce housing and the capital markets. How do we get to a place where we can build housing at that level and finance it and make it affordable to that group? This is no small feat, and really I would almost argue the cost of finance is one thing. It's the cost of construction right now. And leaning into, and I'll make a big push for this, construction technology that can help us bring that cost down is going to be a critical part of our future.
Yeah. Well, so Brendan talked a little bit about that also the last panel. I think Ben Shaw thought about, well, at least talked about it from the kind of leasing perspective, but are there ways your members are using technology to create more affordability?
Anytime you can reduce the cost of operating a unit, you are theoretically creating more affordability because your stack is getting better, and you can help ameliorate the necessity for rent increases when you have things that you can't control. For example, insurance that has gone through the roof. State and local taxes have also gone through the roof. So anything that creates efficiency, creates a better customer experience, theoretically helps affordability. Two parts of that. NMHC has long been involved in the property technology space. For over 20 years, we've had a conference. It's in November. This year it's in October, called OpTech. And OpTech is a marketplace both of products, but it's more importantly for me, a marketplace of ideas. And it really brings the companies that are at the forefront of property technology together to really think through what are the solutions. And anything that will bring the cost of construction down, but also the cost of operation down, will be something that theoretically will help affordability. And we have a lot of focus on this now, particularly at the federal level, but also at state and local legislatures are very interested in regulating the use of AI, very focused on privacy, data security, and really legislating in that space. A lot of our advocacy work is going to be focused on, yes, that's important. However, we don't want to stifle innovation, because innovation will be our path to creating more affordability.
Yeah. This clock goes very fast. I see the 1 minute mark, but I did want to touch on sustainability because some of the largest or some of the fastest growing markets are also some of the most climate vulnerable: Florida, Texas, Arizona, et cetera. And having taught at Syracuse and at Michigan, everybody's like, but we have the water.
Right.
I wish the world worked like that. But we are starting to see things like insurance costs, going into that equation of, affordability, of attainability, of total housing cost. And I'm wondering if you and your organization are thinking about sort of like how we deal with the places that are growing the fastest, but also might be the most climate vulnerable, but also spurring construction in the places that haven't seen a big uptick, are still maybe flat to declining in population, but logical places for affordable, attainable, sustainable housing.
And this is sort of a multi-headed beast as well, because you have the immediate issue of the insurance increases, which are hitting everyone. It's not just the coastal cities. Even in the Midwest, we're seeing significant, not as significant, but significant increases in insurance. They've had flooding from rivers and streams and other things that have also been costly as well. So we're seeing that across the board. So there's probably some long-term issues that we've done a lot of survey work on this, that we're looking for the federal government potentially to step up like they've done with the National Flood Insurance Program, like they've done with terrorism insurance, to help create potentially a backstop. But that's going to be a long-term play. It's going to take a very long time. In the meantime, companies are taking on more risk themselves. They're all flying to London to negotiate with Lloyd's of London, because those guys are the ones that hold the cards here, and really trying to be more active on bringing their costs down in the immediate, and creating captives. I did this in my former life, and the captive is great because you're really insuring parts of your own risk and you can manage it a little bit better. However, it's capital you're not deploying to build the housing that we need. So I think what's going on in the insurance space is really important, but the flip side of what you were mentioning is there are all these technologies and things we can do to make buildings more resilient in the places that are most vulnerable and to build them in places that are less vulnerable. But those all cost money. And the technology isn't fully there yet for those offsets to make sense for people. So we're in a bit of a tug of war. The federal government, through the Infrastructure Act, really put a lot of potential money into this, but the offsets aren't there. And then we're also seeing, and this is a kind of a hidden one, the codes are, the international construction codes and other things are starting to lift up sustainability as being a code requirement before the technology is there and before the prices have come down for that technology, making it increasingly difficult for us to both build and to retrofit to those codes. So that's not the sexy stuff, but that is critically important to our ability to build sustainable housing in the future.
Yeah, I'm just gonna, one more question. Yeah. In the last panel, one of the things that came out was, what is the best place to be? Like, where are the jobs going to be in certain sectors? And so, I heard cybersecurity officer within real estate firms. In the kind of multifamily sector, where would you say is the kind of growing place for somebody to look into, go to, that you see sort of providing opportunity in this current market?
I think anything in that tech space, the cybersecurity, data infrastructure space, but also in operations, because the cost of just operating the property, it used to be something that we sort of took for granted. We would have a leasing agent over here and they would take care of the operations and it would all be fine. We can see the cost of development rise and fall, but the cost of operations is increasing, and sometimes we don't have our eye fully on that ball. So being in the asset management space and also in the technology space that will help keep that operating cost low, and as some of the panelists talked about, also creating the customer experience that the customers of the future want. We've been sort of focused on that interpersonal communication. People will come to your building because they love the property manager. That might be true when we pull it today. It will not be true when we pull it 10 years from now. So being sure that we're creating those digital experiences that are getting customers what they want when they want it, as somebody said in the last panel, and reducing that cost so we can pass that affordability along to getting the unit at the right price point.
You heard it here. Thank you, Sharon.
No, thank you.